Well, surprise move this morning, wasn't it? Because Restore Britain's Rupert Lowe offered Reform UK an olive branch, or what some people would call an olive branch, to work together to build a future patriotic government.
That is why today I'm reaching out to put personalities and our past disagreements aside for the good of the country.
Well, Mr Lowe said he would only agree to a pact if Nigel Farage agreed to 5 policies, including mass deportations, a ban on the burqa and a referendum on the death penalty. He also said that future, I think, current Tory party ministers or former ministers would not be allowed to serve in a future government. Reform's Andrew...
Well, there you go. This is GB News Originals. I'm Emily Carver. Please do give this video a like and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. And do leave a comment. Let me know what you think.
Rosendale spoke to GB News earlier today.
Rupert was elected as a Reform UK MP under Nigel's leadership, so clearly there's common ground on lots of issues.
Well, Nigel Farage has responded tonight. He said this: to deliver change, I understand Reform UK will need the support of people from other parties, as well as millions who have never voted before. That is a broad coalition I am building. So, should Reform be more open to uniting the right and accepting, perhaps, Restore's offer? Well, I'm now joined by commentator and YouTube sensation Bruce Unfiltered, and another sensation, political commentator Lee Harris. Good evening, gentlemen. It's a pleasure to have you both on at the same time. Look, Bruce, I'll start with you. What do you think of this offer from Rupert Lowe to Nigel Farage, or from Restore Britain to Reform UK?
I think, Alex, I made my points very clear on social media earlier today that it felt to me a little bit like very closely after the Manchester election, they probably didn't perform quite as well as they wanted to, picking up, what, 46,000 votes out of a potential 2.1 million, which is another conversation for another day because the vote count or the people that turned out was terrible. But I do think after Makerfield, after the Manchester by-election and possibly other elections that have taken place, they've kind of realised that they're not the political force social media made them to be, and that they might be struggling and they need to form some sort of coalition to effectively what Lowe said today, unite the right, which they didn't seem too interested in for the past sort of 6 to 8 months. So I did find it a little bit odd today, to be perfectly honest. And it seemed like a list of demands more than we need to unite under one banner.
Yeah, so you're a little bit suspicious of it, if I'm right in saying that, Bruce. Now, Lee, you think there's a good chance that we can unite the right? Do you think that there should be some negotiation between the two parties?
Well, I think, to start with, I think what Rupert did today was actually quite a good move. You're absolutely right to be suspicious of it. I don't disagree with anything that Bruce has just said. But I think what's happened is what we've seen is we're having a slightly different conversation that we had 24 hours ago. And what I've seen in, comments on X and people responding to Nigel's response is all of a sudden we've got Restore voters talking about doing a deal or working with Reform to unite the right, and that has changed the tone of the debate. Now, it doesn't really matter to me what Rupert's intentions were, and I'm perfectly sure there's some clever politics behind it in his mind as well, but I also think it shows a little bit of weakness to Rupert Lowe as well. But what he's doing, I think, is he's changed the debate, and I was quite shocked, I have to admit, because like Bruce just said, it wasn't that long ago that Rupert Lowe was saying that Nigel Farage could never be Prime Minister. And now we've got an about turn. Now, I'm very happy with that. I'm a person that likes to kind of straddle both sides a little bit. Now, I believe Reform is probably the best vehicle that we have to win the next election. But I also understand that you have to take the political landscape as we see it. Now, the political landscape as we see it includes Restore, whether we like it or not. And let's just say Nigel would come out today with a harsh rejection to say, this is utterly ludicrous, insulted Restore voters. He could have handled this a lot worse than he did. I was actually pleasantly surprised with Nigel Farage's response. I've seen some people say it's a bit weak and but I think it kind of needed to be, because what I didn't want to see above all else was Nigel to come out of the blocks, insult Restore voters, insult this potential public olive branch, but he's dealt with it, I think, with an element of restraint and an element of respect, which is what I like to see.
Yeah, I think I was actually quite surprised to see Nigel Farage respond to it, I have to admit. Bruce, In terms of all of this negotiation, I think you pointed out something at the start of this. Rupert Lowe has basically put out some red lines. He's made a demand. I think some of the red lines on policies could be quite easily got over the line by Reform and Restore voters on both sides. But there is something there that I think actually might be a red line for Reform, which is saying, actually, people like Robert Jenrick, Andrew Rosendale, Danny Kruger, who else am I missing? Suella Braverman would not be allowed to serve in a ministerial position in a future government. What's your take on the negotiation stance here?
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? The question, Alex, and as well, I convey with what Lee said there with quite a lot of it. I do like how this has played out across social media today. But going back to your point, I like Suella Braverman, and from the earliest points of Restore coming, I'd always maintained, which is something that staunchly I think Restore voters have been against, is there would be an inception or there would be a recruitment of Conservative MPs, provided they align with Reform UK policy. I think Braverman, Kruger, Jenrick, Anderson, we could all say do. They fundamentally align with the policy that Reform have got, if people have actually bothered to read it. I do think that Reform's immigration policy is very, very similar to Restore Britain's. I think when we're talking politically, is the death penalty that important? Is the ban of halal and kosher meat that important? When we're talking about subjects like net zero, national security, education, technology, the economy, we have to look at the bigger picture here. And I think the question has to be is, what do Restore actually bring to the table with regard to their candidates, with regard to where they sit in constituencies, with regard to how much are they putting on the table, and what have Reform got to, accept, and what are they giving? Because as much as people want to say Restore have, and I will not deny this, they have made a political explosion. Let's not beat about the bush with that one. They exploded on the scene, got a massive member base very quickly. Their social media went through the roof. I think I'd maintained for the longest period of time that would not necessarily translate into electoral voting, because politics is very different to social media. I think we can all agree on that. And I think that's being demonstrated. And I go back to my original point where I think maybe they're getting to a point where they're not necessarily getting I don't know what their funding situation is, but it's starting to cost them money. They're starting to front people up, and they're not really making the gains I think they wanted to. I think they're starting to, and trust me, I fully endorse the unite of the right, the unification of the right, because it's something I've maintained since 2022 on social media. I picked Reform as my flag, and I wanted people to unite under that banner against this establishment, and particularly a Labour government.
This is the thing, Bruce, and I'll put this back over to you, Lee, because this is the thing. If Reform and Restore did a pact together, could that alienate the Tories? Because actually what is likely to happen, if we're looking at the landscape of things, let's assume there might be a snap general election, which I think is coming sooner rather than later. Essentially what you'd need at this point in time would be a hung parliament. You'd need Reform and the Tories to work together. Could it show some weakness if Reform are willing to do a pact now with a much smaller party?
It depends on how they deliver that. I think prior to the election, I think most parties, we're all quite used to this, watching politics over the years. They're not going to openly say they're going to do any deals way before an election. They're going to rightly, try and keep their voter base and not sort of.
Behind Westminster's closed doors, the quiet collapse of British government. There is a distinct aroma that hangs around the corridors of Palace of Westminster when a government begins to lose its grip on reality. It is a mix of stale coffee, cheap Prosecco from hastily arranged committee receptions, and the unmistakable stench of institutional panic. If you step back and look at the state of British politics right now, you quickly realise that what we are witnessing is not merely a rough patch in the political cycle. It is a profound structural failure of leadership that spans across the entire political spectrum. Welcome back to Britain Underneath, the place where we strip away the sanitised parliamentary statements and look at the uncomfortable realities shaping our nation. Yet, whether it is the management of our public services, the handling of economic pressures, or the endless posturing over national security and energy policy, the outcomes remain remarkably consistent. Things simply do not work as they ought to. The National Health Service faces structural bottlenecks that throwing money alone no longer seems to resolve. Infrastructure projects face endless delays and soaring budgets, while local councils across the country quietly warn of financial insolvency. It is a slow, systemic decline, disguised as routine governance. What makes this situation particularly intriguing is the utter detachment of the political class from the daily friction experienced by ordinary citizens. While Westminster debates ideological nuances and party infighting, households up and down the country are navigating a quietly compounding cost of living crisis, rising utility strains, and decaying civic infrastructure. The political establishment operates on the assumption that the British public has an infinite capacity for patience. But patience, much like public trust, is an exhaustible resource. The political consensus that held Britain together for decades is wearing paper. On the other, emerging populist factions promise radical upheaval, yet often offer little more than sound bites designed for social media engagement rather than actual administrative capability. It is a classic dilemma of British politics, a choice between stagnant management and volatile posturing. Neither side appears willing to confront the underlying reality that the machinery of the British state requires deep, uncomfortable structural reform rather than superficial tinkering. This brings us to the core mechanism driving current events: the sheer reluctance of leadership to speak directly to the public with total candour. Decisions regarding long-term national debt, energy security, and regional development are routinely deferred to future parliaments or buried under complex bureaucratic reviews. Take a breath and think about the sheer volume of legislation introduced each year that does nothing to alter the trajectory of the average person's life. It is governance by optical management. Leaders are far more concerned with controlling the narrative for the evening news cycle than they are with laying down infrastructure that will stand for 30 years. As we look at the shifting political landscape, the rise of regional disillusionment cannot be ignored. The promise of levelling up distant communities has largely dissolved into administrative squabbles over minor regional grants. Voters outside the central political hubs are increasingly aware that national decisions are framed around immediate electoral calculus rather than long-term national interest. This growing divide between the governing institutions and the electorate creates a volatile environment where public confidence drops further with every unfulfilled assurance. To truly understand where the country is heading, one must pay close attention to the quiet shifts happening beneath the surface. It is not just about who holds power in the immediate term, but about how the fundamental relationship between the citizen and the state is being altered. When basic public contracts begin to falter, the entire democratic framework is tested. Staying informed on these developments is no longer just a passive hobby. It is essential for understanding how these national decisions directly impact our economic stability, our local communities, and our future. If you value this level of grounded, mature analysis that cuts straight through parliamentary fluff, please consider subscribing to Britain Underneath. Supporting the channel takes only a second, but it empowers us to keep producing the direct, analytical coverage you rely on. By subscribing, you ensure you never miss an update as we continue to track the evolving political landscape. Ultimately, the future of British politics will not be decided by clever party management or temporary political manoeuvres. It will be decided when the public collectively demands a standard of governance that matches the magnitude of the challenges we face. Until then, the quiet collapse behind closed doors will continue uninterrupted, disguised as business as usual. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Take a moment to reflect on these realities, stay informed, and ensure you subscribe to Britain Underneath so you never miss our next deep dive into the true state of the nation.